sports mentor is named Gary, and he came up to me when I was a nobody in the company and gave me an opportunity, and he said, hey, I want to come out and speak for you. And I was so humbled and so blessed that a guy at that time making $750,000 a year was willing to come out and help a guy who I was a nobody. My income, I was making like 30, 40 grand a year in Primerica. And I was a brand new regional vice president. I was scared to death. I never owned a business. I was 21 years old. And this guy who's making 750 grand a year doesn't know me and pays for his own flight to come out. At that time I was living in Idaho. And pays for his own flight to come to Idaho from Los Angeles. Doesn't know me, doesn't meet me, for it changed my life. Within about 90 days of him coming to speak, I was making 20 grand a month, and I never forgot it. And at that time, his top guy was Art Martinez, who dominated the company, and they just have inspired us so much, and I just attribute a huge part of our success to you guys here, and so I never take that for granted. So anytime I get the opportunity to come share my story with your guys' organization, I don't make a penny to be here. But I have made a lot of money because of some of the people who have inspired me and helped me in this office. So just give it up for Art Martinez again. I think I'll talk to you a little bit about my story. I started Primerica. I started Primerica April of 2006. So what's that exactly? 7 years. April 30th of 2006. So right at 7 years ago, I started Primerica. I was 20 years old, and I was scared to death, man. I was a boxer for 7 years, so I was not this outgoing person. I didn't have this outgoing personality where I love to talk to people. I'm still an introvert by nature, but I had two choices. It was like be quiet and broke, or get out of my shell and get rich. I chose the latter. And but I was a very introverted guy, so it was very uncomfortable for me to come into Primerica and do a business like this where, one, I had to talk in front of people or had to talk to people. I really didn't, it wasn't something that was natural for me. But I was doing advertising and marketing for a living. I did like TV commercials or radio ads and that kind of stuff, and I loved it. I had a good time doing it. But I got my pay cut. I don't know if anybody in here has ever got their pay cut before, but I was pissed. I felt violated. The harder I worked, the less money they paid me. And so I was frustrated. I had this guy named Brandon Neal who would keep inviting me to a meeting like you guys were sitting in at night. And I'm from Utah originally. And when you grow up in Utah and someone invites you to a meeting, it's usually at a hotel and they're selling juice. You know what I'm talking about? And so you don't go to a meeting in Utah. I mean, seriously, you just don't do it. If somebody invites you to a meeting, no joke, they're probably selling juice. And so this guy kept inviting me to this meeting. And so finally, after my pay gets cut, he invited me 77 times.
Wow.
He would call me and call me and call me and call me. Well, finally my pay gets cut, and I was smart enough at that time to take my girlfriend down to the meeting. And we're sitting there, and this guy was on stage, and I said, what do I have to lose, And I just knew that I was going to have to work my butt off. I knew that if I was going to make big money, it was going to take a lot of work. And to be honest with you, I was okay with working hard as long as it was going to pay off, as long as I could control my future, as long as nobody could cut my pay ever again. I don't know if you guys have ever been in that spot where you've been laid off or whatever. People say secure job. How is it secure if you can get laid off tomorrow? How is it secure if someone cuts your pay? How is it secure if they tell you when to show up and when not to show up? There's no security in that. You don't control anything. How is there security in something that you have no control over? And I understood that, thank God, at a young age. And at that time, I decided I was going to start Primerica working one night a week. And I made $15,000 my first year, part-time, working one night a week. Now, it's not like I hit the ball out of the park the first year, right or wrong. But I had to learn it. I was 20 years old. What do you know about finance at 20 years old? Like, you're talking about the rule of 72 and bypass the middleman and all that. I had no freaking clue what any of that. I never even heard those words. I didn't even know what life insurance was at 20 years old. I didn't even know it was a product that was marketed. I mean, honest to goodness, I had no clue about any of it, but I did know I wanted to make more money. So I started, made $15,000 my first year, went full-time. At the end of my first year, I moved from St. George, Utah, which is where I'm originally from, small town, 50,000 people, and I moved to Boise, Idaho, which was 9 hours away because nobody was doing anything there with our company. I moved up there, and our first 12 months there made 115 grand. I was 21, just turned 22 years old, made 115 grand my first year full time. I was jacked up. My wife was 19, and I just brought my brother-in-law with me. He's actually he just turned 19, but it's my wife's little brother. And I was telling my wife, you know, how awesome is it that you've been making $100 grand a year since you were 19 years old. You don't even know what it's like to not make $100 grand a year because we were willing to pay a price. It was because we were willing to say yes when we showed up to a meeting like this. If we would have said no, we'd have been broke just like everybody else. But the difference is we decided to take a path that was different from what everybody else in our lives was doing at that time, which was going to school, get good grades so you can get a degree, and graduate college with a bunch of debt and no job like everybody is doing right now. Yes or no?
Yep.
And see, I believe everybody that came down here tonight, everybody wants a higher quality of life. See, I love America because we're a boiling pot. You know, so like you guys heard earlier, the gal was talking about she's from El Salvador, right?
Yeah.
And so she comes from El Salvador. And from another, I love knowing that you can come from anywhere in the world. Think about tonight, there are people risking their lives to get into this country.
Yep.
Not so they can have, you know, I was riding in a taxi cab not too long ago to the airport, and I asked the guy, so where are you from? He goes, I'm from Iraq. I go, how long have you been in the United States? He goes, 15 years. I go, wow, you've been here a long time. He goes, yeah. I go, so is it what you thought it would be? He goes, nope, same job, different place. This is from Iraq. So he comes to America, someone told him to go to college and get a degree. So guess what he did? Went to college, got a degree. So he graduates college, but has no experience, so nobody will hire him. Guess what he only has experience in? Driving a cab. So now he does the same thing that he was doing before. And thinks that it's same job, different place. Can you believe that?
That's sad.
So I love America because there's people all over the world that come to America to have a higher quality of life. And is it possible to have a higher quality of life?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what everybody wants. I don't care if you were born in America, weren't born in America, speak English, don't speak English. I don't care what color you are, sex, education. It doesn't matter. We all want a higher quality of life. So the question we have to ask is then, what is a higher quality of life? Agree?
Yep.
So here's what a higher quality of life is. One is more time, but also more money. See, if you have one without the other, it is not a higher quality of life. See, if you have a lot of time and no money, that's called unemployed. About 15 million people figured out what that was like, yes or no? Maybe some of you in here. If you have a lot of money and no time, that's called divorced. Right? That's why you guys see these doctors been divorced 2 or 3 times. You see these musicians that end up dead from drugs or they end up alcoholics. You want to know why? Because if you have a lot of money and no time, you have no way to escape. So that's why you go, why did Michael Jackson end up dead? You want to know why? Because he had no way to escape. His only way to escape was drugs. He had no way to escape. See, that's what happens if you have self-employed. See, just because he had a lot of money didn't mean he had a high quality of life. See, most people that are broke think if you have a lot of money, you have a high quality of life. That is simply not true. But if you have no money, you don't have a high quality of life either. But see, if you have a ton of time and you have a ton of money, that's called utopia. That is a high quality of life. Does that make sense? See, with a lot of time and a lot of money, you can do whatever you want. And I believe that's what everybody wants. So if you look at what's happening in our country, and this is fact, and I want you guys to know, Money Magazine did this study. In fact, they have done this study every year for about 75 years in the United States. 75 years they've done the same study, and they take 100 people after working from the ages of 25 to 65. So that's a 40-year career. And most people starting at 25 is starting late. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah.
That's starting late. So that's a 40-year career. By the way, they just passed in the legislation. Raise your hand if you're under 45 years old. You have to work till you're 69 years old to get a Social Security check now.
Wow.
Crazy. So if your parents, some of your parents are like 44, now they have to work to 69 to even see the minimum Social Security check.
Wow.
They got to work to like 72 or 73 to see the maximum now.
Wow. That's ridiculous.
Crazy, right? But so
That's
let's say
not
25 to 65, 54% of those people end up dependent on welfare, or dependent on Social Security, or dependent, which means they worked for 40 years of their life. And if they did not have somebody providing them with money, they would not be able to feed themselves. 54%. Is that a huge percentage?
Yep.
That's like, here's the statistic. This is guaranteed fact. This is what's going to happen. I guarantee you 40 years from now, we could split this room in half. And this half of the room, guess what? Y'all going to be dependent.
Heck no.
Guaranteed. That's the way it works. We don't know what 54%, but we know that that's the statistic. Right? Also, 36 of them are still working. So 36% of this side of the room, y'all are going to be saying, welcome to Walmart. Thanks for getting on Frontier Airlines. Crazy, right? 5% are deceased, and 4% are okay with $1 million, and 1% is wealthy with $5 million. And so we've always been taught to ask, why do 95% fail when it comes to their finances? We give them all these things, right? That's what everybody says. Why do 90? And you know what I always tell everybody? People would ask me, they would say, so Jeff, how many people win in Primerica? I go, 100% of the people that decide to win. Well, how many people lose? I don't know. I never paid attention to the loser. Let me ask you this. This last year during the NBA draft, how many people didn't get drafted to the NBA?
Who knows?
Never thought about that. You just paid attention to the ones that did. Yes or no?
Yeah.
That's the way it should work. So they always ask this question. I go, screw the 95%. I want to know what the heck does this guy do so I can do what he did. I don't know if any of you think like that, but I want to know, what do the 1% do? That was my question. So we said, okay, here's what the 1% do. Out of the wealthy 1%, which means you have to have a net worth of $5 million or more in America, right? 1% of the 1% came from lottery or inheritance. So when next time you see that 25-year-old kid driving a Ferrari, understand Daddy most likely did not buy it for him. I know you think that, but that most likely is not what happened. Because only 1% of 1%, that's actually what happened. 5% of 1% are salespeople. 10% of 1% are CEOs, presidents, or doctors, or attorneys. So I sit down with people at the kitchen table and I tell them, you're teaching your kid right now to go to the best college and get the best education so they can go get a job, work their way up a corporate ladder, which worked for their parents, yes or no? Like it worked for my grandparents. Didn't work for my mom, but it worked for my grandparents. That's what you did. You went to a good school, you worked at a company for 40, 50 years, worked your way up the corporate ladder, retired with a gold watch and a pension. Right or wrong? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't work anymore. So I tell them, look, the reality is the likelihood of you getting wealthy is 0.2%. You're sending your kids through the hardest way to get wealthy in America if you teach them to go become a doctor, attorney, CEO, or work their way up the corporate ladder. Now, it's not that it can't happen, but the likelihood of it happening is very small. But 74% of those people are self-made millionaires or entrepreneurs. Is that big? Mm-hmm. So here's what I ask people all the time. What's your name?
Brianna.
Brianna. So Brianna, let's say I gave you a dart. Let's say I give Brianna a dart and I say, Brianna, I've got $100 right here. So I'm going to pull out this $100 bill and I'm going to give you $100. I got a dart as well, okay? And for the $100, all you got to do is you got to pick a color on that graph and you have to hit the color you choose. If you hit the color, you get the $100. Now, what color is she choosing?
Yellow.
You guys realize your life is no different.
Yeah.
True.
You're choosing where you're throwing a dart. You're the one that chooses whether or not you become a doctor. Or she could have said, hey, I want this green part right here. But that would not be a very smart bet, yes or no?
Right.
So if I was going to be a person that was going to play the odds, I would pick my best odds, right? I'm from Las Vegas, so it's smart to play your odds. By the way, the casinos play odds too. Who knows the odds the best? You walking in the casino or the casino? The casino. And then you wonder why they got the biggest buildings. You wonder why they make the most money. You wonder why they're picking you up in a Rolls-Royce Phantom, their Rolls-Royce Phantom, and giving you a ride to the casino so you can spend all your money. And then they'll send you home broke.
Woo!
The same thing happens to colleges in corporate America too. You think it's just casinos? I go, wow, nobody ever talked to me like this before, right? So, you got to understand that 95% of our population are employees. See, they didn't talk about the cash flow quadrant, right? Did anybody cover the cash flow quadrant?
No.
No.
There's 4 ways in America to earn income. The first way is to be an employee. Can y'all say employee?
Employee.
See, if you're an employee, your boss controls your lifestyle. What do they control about your lifestyle? Everything. Where you live, what kind of cars you drive, what kind of vacations you take, what kind of schools your kids go to, what kind of neighborhoods you live in. How? By how much money they pay you. If somebody works at Wendy's flipping burgers, do they live in a different neighborhood than the guy who owns the Wendy's?
Yes.
Yes. So if you're an employee, the problem with being an employee is this. Anything in America with EE on the end of it means you don't own it. Like in this office, for example, if you're a leasee, who owns it?
Leaseor.
The leaseor. So if you're an employee, who owns it?
The employer.
The employer. So I tell everybody, if Obama got on TV tomorrow and said, hey guys, we figured out how to fix this real estate mess, it's never going to happen again, from now on nobody can own real estate, who thinks it would cause a civil war? Guaranteed. So why is it that a piece of land would cause a civil war, but yet you being an employee